People always ask me what the bravest thing I ever saw in the army was. They expect me to talk about a firefight. Some big charge up a hill, smoke and shouting, all of that. And I tell them no. The bravest thing I ever saw was a woman in a stained apron, standing in the snow at 2 in the morning, asking for the keys to a truck. Her name was Dana Whitlock. She was our cook. I want you to sit with that for a second. Our cook. Not a ranger. Not some special forces guy with a beard and a 1,000-yard stare. A 38-year-old woman from a small town in Ohio who fed 200 soldiers 3 times a day and never once raised her voice while doing it. That's who walked into the worst night of my life and walked back out carrying half of it on her shoulders. I was 19 that winter. I'd been at the outpost for maybe 4 months. Everybody called the place Granger after a guy who'd been there before any of us and was long gone. It sat up in the mountains where the air got so thin and cold it felt like breathing broken glass. In December, the sun gave up around 4 in the afternoon and didn't bother coming back until almost 8. So we lived in the dark mostly. You forget what your own face looks like in real daylight. And it was Christmas Eve. I remember because Dana wouldn't let us forget. She'd been planning it for weeks. She traded for things. I don't know how she did it, but somehow on a frozen rock at the edge of the world she'd gotten her hands on real potatoes, actual butter, 2 cases of canned cranberry sauce, and a stack of those little frozen pies that come in tins. She had the cooks under her running like it was a wedding. She'd hung paper snowflakes that some kid's class back home had mailed over. She'd strung up a line of Christmas lights. She'd been hiding in her footlocker since October. The mess tent that night was the warmest place any of us had been in months. Not just the heat. The warmth, you know what I mean. Guys who hadn't smiled in weeks were laughing. Somebody had a speaker playing the old songs, Bing Crosby and all that, and Dana was behind the line in her apron, sleeves pushed up, scooping mashed potatoes onto trays and telling everybody to take more, eat more, there's plenty, sit down, you're too skinny. She had this way about her. She'd look at you, really look, and she'd remember things. She knew my mother had been sick. She'd ask about it without making it a big thing. "How's your mom, Marsh?" Quiet, just for me, while she handed me my plate. Little stuff like that. You don't realize until later how rare it is, somebody seeing you when you feel invisible. I asked her once why she joined up. She laughed and said she wanted to be a medic when she was young. Combat medic, the whole thing, she'd trained for it. But she'd torn something up in her knee bad during a jump years back, and the Army in its wisdom decided a busted knee meant she should cook instead of patch people up. She didn't say it bitter, she just shrugged. "Same job, kind of," she told me. "I still keep people alive, just slower." I didn't understand what she meant by that, not yet. So it's Christmas Eve. The mess tent is glowing, and about a third of our guys aren't in it. There was a squad out. First squad, Sergeant Ramos's bunch. They'd gone out that morning on a resupply run to a little observation post we kept maybe 9 miles down the valley, a place we called the Notch. 2 trucks, 8 men. It was supposed to be nothing. Drive down, drop off ammunition and food and a working radio because the one at the Notch had died, drive back before dark. Routine. The kind of thing you did 100 times and never thought about. Ramos was a good sergeant, steady. He had a wife and a little girl back home, and a photo of them taped inside his helmet, which was against about 4 regulations, and nobody ever said a word about it. His radio guy was a kid named Tully. Couldn't have been more than 20, freckles, talked too much. The kind of kid you couldn't help but like even when you wanted to strangle him. Those were the guys out there. 8 of ours, eating cold rations in 2 trucks while the rest of us had pie. They were late. By 6 they should have been back. By 7, nobody was worried yet. The valley road was bad in the snow, easy to lose time. By 8, the captain had stopped eating. I saw him put his fork down and not pick it up again. He went over to the radio shack and didn't come back. You learn to read the base by how the senior guys move. When the lieutenants start walking fast and not making eye contact, something's wrong. By 9, the music in the mess tent had been turned off. Nobody decided to turn it off. It just got turned off. The lights were still up. the snowflakes still hanging there, but the warmth had drained out of the room, and we were all just sitting in the leftover decorations of a party that had ended without anybody saying so. Then the call came in. I wasn't in the radio shack, but Tully's voice carried, even through a closed door, even chopped up by the bad signal. I heard pieces of it later, and what I heard I'll never get out of my head. He was screaming. Not words at first, just sound. Then words, they'd been hit. Down in the notch on the way back where the road pinched between two ridgelines and you couldn't go fast and you couldn't turn around. Somebody had been waiting for them there. Both trucks were stopped. Men were down. Ramos was down. Tully was on the radio because there was nobody else to do it. The captain's voice came back over the net, flat and hard, the way men get when they're holding themselves together with both hands. Hold your position. Help is coming. Stay low, we're coming. And then he had to figure out how to make that true. This is the part nobody puts in the movies. The quick reaction force, the guys whose whole job is to come save you when this happens, were already gone. Half of them had gone out 2 days before on a separate mission to the far side of the range and weren't back. The other half were scattered, some sick, some manning the wire because you can never strip your own walls bare. We were a small outpost. We were thin to begin with, and on Christmas Eve we were thinner. The captain stood in that radio shack and counted bodies he could send, and the number was not enough. And the birds couldn't fly. The medevac helicopters, the gunships, all of it grounded. There was weather coming down off the peaks, a wall of it, snow and wind, and a ceiling so low the pilots said flying into that valley in the dark would just be a second crash to go with the first. They weren't being cowards. They were being right, but right didn't help Ramos. So now you've got a squad 9 miles away, ambushed, men bleeding in the snow on Christmas Eve, a kid screaming on a dying radio, and a base full of people who would have given anything to go get them and almost no way to do it. The road was the only road. And the road was where the ambush was. I was standing outside the radio shack in the cold with maybe a dozen other guys, all of us useless, all of us listening, when Dana came up. She still had her apron on, flour on her hands. She'd come up from the mess tent because the whole base had gone quiet, and she knew that kind of quiet. She'd been in long enough to know what it meant. She stood there next to me listening to the captain's voice and the broken pieces of Tully's, and I watched her face change. I'll never forget it. It went from worry to something else, something settled, something that had made a decision before the rest of her had caught up to it. She'd been to the notch. That was the thing nobody else fully had in their head right then, but she had. She ran the resupply manifests, she knew the route, she'd ridden it herself more than once to set up the field kitchen down there during the long patrols that summer. She knew there was a second way in, an old track that wound up over the shoulder of the eastern ridge, narrow and bad, the kind of thing you'd never take a convoy down, but one truck could. One truck driven by somebody who knew it was there and wasn't afraid of the drop on the left side. You could come down behind the notch instead of straight into it. You could come in the back door. And she knew first aid better than anyone on that base who wasn't already a medic, because she'd trained for the thing they wouldn't let her do, and she'd never stopped reading the manuals, never stopped, all those years, because you don't kill a thing you love just because somebody tells you you can't have it. She walked into the radio shack. I followed. I don't know why I followed. Nobody told me to. The captain was hunched over the map with the first sergeant, both of them trying to bend 9 miles of frozen mountain into something they could cross in time. Dana waited until there was a half-second of quiet, and then she said it plain. "Sir, there's a back road. I know it. Give me a truck and a medic bag and somebody to ride shotgun, and I'll go in over the eastern shoulder while you push up the main road and pull their eyes the other way." The captain looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Whitlock," he said, "you're a cook." "Yes, sir," she said. "And I'm the only person on this base who's driven that track, and I can keep a man with a hole in him breathing long enough to get him home. And right now, you don't have anybody else who can say both of those things. So, that word again, The way she ended things, like a door closing soft. The first sergeant started to argue. The captain held up a hand. He looked at the map. He looked at the clock. He looked at her, this woman with flour on her hands and her apron still on, and you could see him doing the math that no commander ever wants to do, the math where you weigh 1 life you're about to risk against 8 you're about to lose. Outside, the snow had started to come down for real. He said yes. I still think about that yes, about how much it cost him to say it. A captain isn't supposed to send a cook into an ambush. There's no line in any manual that lets you do that and feel good about it. But he wasn't choosing between a good option and a bad one. He was choosing between bad and worse in the dark, with a clock running and a kid screaming on the radio. So he said yes, and then he started moving fast, because the only way to live with a decision like that is to make it work. He pulled together what he could. The main push would go up the valley road, loud, lights, everything. 4 guys in an armored truck under the first sergeant, not to win anything, just to make noise. To pull the enemy's attention down the throat of the valley so Dana could slip in the back. A decoy made of men who knew they were a decoy. That takes a kind of nerve I still don't have. For the truck going over the ridge, they gave her a young soldier named Cobb to drive, because Dana said she'd rather navigate and work on the wounded than fight the wheel the whole way, and Cobb had hands like a surgeon on bad roads. And they needed one more, somebody to ride in back and pull security and help load men. I said I'd go. I don't know where it came from. I was 19. I was scared out of my mind. But Dana looked at me when I said it, and she didn't tell me I was too young or too green. She just nodded once like she'd expected it and said, "Stay close to me and do exactly what I say and we'll all eat breakfast tomorrow." And somehow when she said it I believed her. That was her gift. She could make a thing true just by saying it like it already was. They loaded the truck in maybe 10 minutes. Medic bags, 2 of them stripped from the aid station. Litters, ammunition, blankets because cold kills the wounded faster than almost anything, and Dana knew that. She said it twice. Get the blankets, the cold's going to be half our fight. Somebody handed me a rifle and I checked it the way I'd been taught and tried to keep my hands from shaking and mostly failed. Dana took off her apron, I remember that. She folded it, this small careful fold, and set it on a crate by the door of the mess tent like she'd be back for it. Then she put on her gear and climbed in front and said, "Okay, Cobb, east shoulder. Lights off once we clear the wire. I'll tell you where." And we drove out into the snow. I want you to understand what that road was. Calling it a road is generous. It was a scar on the side of a mountain, a track maybe wide enough for one vehicle if that vehicle held its breath. On the left, going up, the ground just fell away into black. You couldn't see the bottom. You didn't want to. On the right, rock. We ran with the lights off because lights would have told the whole valley we were coming, so Cobb drove by feel and by the little green glow of the night vision and by Dana's voice, low and steady the whole way. "Left here. Ease it. There's a switchback coming, take it slow, the back end's going to want to slide. Good, you're good, keep going." She never stopped talking and she never sounded scared. I found out later her hands were white-knuckled the whole time on the door handle. She just didn't let it into her voice, because Cobb needed her voice to be calm, so her voice was calm. That was a choice she made over and over every second of that drive. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is keeping your voice steady so the kid driving the truck doesn't drive it off the mountain. We could hear the main push start. Down below and ahead of us, the dark lit up. The first sergeant's truck rolling up the valley road, loud, throwing light around, making themselves the biggest target in the world. We heard the ambush wake up and turn toward them. Heard it open up. And it worked, God help those men, it worked, because the enemy's eyes swung down the valley toward the noise. And we kept crawling along the back of the ridge in the dark, where nobody was looking. Tully was still on the radio. The captain kept him talking from back at base, kept his voice in the kid's ear so he wouldn't be alone, kept asking him questions just to keep him answering. How many can move? Where's Ramos? Is he breathing? The answers came back smaller and smaller. Tully had stopped screaming. That was almost worse. He'd gone quiet and flat, the way you do when you've used up all your fear and there's nothing left but the cold and the waiting. Dana keyed her own radio once, just once. "First squad, this is the relief element. We're coming in from your 6 up over the east shoulder. Don't shoot the truck behind you, that's us. We're almost there. Hold on, Tully. You hear me? Hold on, we're almost there." There was a pause, then Tully's voice thin as paper. "Who is this?" And Dana said, "It's the cook, honey, I brought blankets." I swear to you, in the middle of all that, Cobb laughed. One short broken laugh. And I think it saved him a little in that moment, just enough to keep his hands steady on the wheel for the last mile. We came down off the shoulder behind the notch maybe 20 minutes after the main push started. Cobb killed the engine and we coasted the last stretch, rolling quiet down the back slope, and there below us in the snow we could see them. The 2 trucks. One was off the road, nose down in the ditch, dark. The other sat crooked in the middle of the track where it had stopped. Around them, shapes in the snow, some moving, some not. The fight was still going on, but it was pointed the other way now, down the valley at the first sergeant's truck. The enemy was up on the western ridge, dug in, hammering at the decoy and not watching their own back door. Exactly like Dana said. She'd read the whole thing in her head from a map and a memory, and she'd been right. We came in behind Ramos's men. Dana was out of the truck before it fully stopped. I remember thinking, she's going to get herself killed, and then I remember thinking, no, she isn't, look at her. She moved low and fast between the rocks, and she went to the nearest shape in the snow, and she had her hands on him before I'd even gotten my legs to work. It was a kid named Das. He'd taken a hit to the leg, high up, the bad kind, and he'd been bleeding into the snow for the better part of an hour. The snow under him was black in the night vision. Dana didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't say anything dramatic. She just got to work, fast and sure, the way somebody works when they've trained their whole life for a job nobody would let them do. She had a tourniquet on him and cranked tight before I'd finished crossing the 10 feet between us. She slapped a blanket over him and said in my ear, calm as anything, "Marsh, this one's stable. Drag him to the truck, easy, keep your head down, then come back to me. We're going to do this one at a time and we're going to do it fast. Go." I went. Behind us, down the valley, the first sergeant's truck was taking everything the enemy had, and on the radio I could hear the captain's voice getting tighter, asking how long, because the decoy couldn't last forever. The whole thing balanced on time. We had a window, and the window was closing, and somewhere up on that western ridge somebody was eventually going to wonder why there was a second truck behind the trucks they'd already killed. I dragged Das to the truck and went back. Dana was already on the next man, then the next. She found Tully huddled against the wheel of the lead truck, the radio still clutched in his hand, frozen half to death and white as the snow, and she pulled him up and looked him in the eyes and said, "There you are. Good boy, you did good. You kept them talking and you kept yourself alive, and that's the whole job. Now help me with the others." And she put him to work, because she knew, somehow she knew, that the kindest thing you can do for a kid who's been alone and terrified is hand him a purpose. We found 6 of them alive, 6 out of 8. We were loading the 5th into the truck, Cobb and Tully and me hauling and Dana directing every move when I heard her stop, just for a second. She'd gone to the front of the lead truck, to the driver's side, and she'd found Sergeant Ramos. She knelt down next to him in the snow, and up on the western ridge, somewhere in the dark, the guns started to turn around. Ramos was alive. Barely. He'd taken it bad in the chest and the side, and he'd been down in the cold a long time. Most men would have been gone, but Ramos had that photo taped inside his helmet, the wife and the little girl, and I think a part of him had decided he wasn't allowed to die on Christmas Eve. He was breathing in these short, hard pulls when Dana got to him, and his eyes were open, looking up at the snow coming down, and his lips were moving but no sound was coming out. Dana got down in the snow next to him and put her face close to his. "Ramos," she said, "it's Whitlock, I've got you, you hear me, I've got you and we are going home." And up on the ridge the guns turned. Somebody up there had finally figured it out. Maybe they saw the truck. Maybe one of them just had a bad feeling and looked the wrong way at the right time. But the fire that had been pouring down the valley at the first sergeant's decoy started to swing, started to walk across the snow toward us, and the rocks around the trucks began to spark and crack. Cobb yelled something. Tully grabbed me and pulled me down behind the engine block of the dead truck. The whole world got very loud. Here's the thing I need you to understand, because it's the center of everything I'm telling you. In that moment, with the fire coming in, every instinct a human being has screams at you to get small and get gone, to leave. Ramos was the hardest man to move. He was the farthest out. He was the most likely to die anyway. Every cold piece of math said load the 5 you've got and drive. Nobody would have blamed her. Nobody would have called it cowardice. It would have been called a hard call, and the army is full of hard calls, and she could have lived the rest of her life knowing. She saved 5 out of 8, and that's more than most people would have managed. Dana didn't even think about it. I watched her face. There wasn't a flicker of that math in it. She got her arms under Ramos and she started dragging him toward the truck through the snow with the rounds coming in, and she yelled back over her shoulder, not panicked, just loud and clear, "Marsh! Cobb, I need hands. We are not leaving him, now move." And we moved. Because she told us to, and because she was already out there doing the thing the rest of us were too scared to do, and you cannot watch your cook drag a dying man through gunfire and decide you're going to stay behind the engine block. You just can't. She pulled us out there with her. All of us, by sheer force of being braver than we were. We got Ramos. 3 of us low, slipping in the snow, the truck 20 feet away and then 10 and then there. Cobb took a graze across the shoulder going and never even slowed down, just grunted and kept lifting. We got Ramos onto the litter and into the back, and Dana was on top of him before he was even settled, hands on the wound, pressing down, keeping the life inside him through the heels of her palms. "Cobb," she shouted, "drive. Same way we came, don't stop, I don't care what you hit, you keep us moving up that shoulder." Cobb drove. I have never been so scared in my life as I was on the way back up that mountain. The way down had been slow and careful and silent. The way up was the opposite of all 3. Cobb had the truck screaming, lights still off, throwing snow, the back end fishtailing toward that black drop on every turn. In the back I was hanging onto the litter and onto Tully and onto anything I could reach, and Dana was kneeling over Ramos the entire time, riding every bump and slide, never once taking her hands off the wound. She'd brace with her legs and her body and keep the pressure on no matter how the truck threw her. She talked to him the whole way. I don't even remember what she said. Just her voice, low and steady, the same voice that had handed me my dinner 1,000 times and asked how my mother was doing. The same voice that had walked Cobb down the mountain in the dark. She poured it over Ramos like it was a medicine, and maybe it was. Behind us the fire chased and then fell away as we cleared the shoulder and put the rock between us and the ridge. The first sergeant's truck, the decoy, the men who'd made themselves bait, they broke contact and ran for home too, and somehow, every one of them made it. I still don't fully understand how. The captain had thrown a thin line of men into a bad night and pulled almost all of them back out, and the reason he could was a cook with a back road in her memory. We came through the wire at Granger a little after 2 in the morning. The whole base was awake and waiting. They'd lit the place up, all the lights they had like a lighthouse, so we'd have something to drive toward. I remember coming through the gate and seeing all those faces in the snow, every soldier on that outpost standing out in the cold in the middle of the night, waiting, and the way they surged forward when they saw the trucks come in. The medics were on us before we stopped. They took Ramos first. Dana wouldn't let go of him until they had their own hands on the wound, until she was sure the pressure never came off for even a second, and then she let them lift him away, and she sat back on her heels in the bed of that truck and looked at her hands. They were red to the wrists. She just looked at them like they belonged to somebody else. Ramos lived. I'll tell you that now because I don't want you sitting through this not knowing. They got the birds in at first light when the weather broke, and they flew him and Das and the others out to a real hospital, and Ramos went home to that wife and that little girl. He lost part of a lung and he never deployed again, but he went home. He held his daughter again, because a woman who'd been told she couldn't be a medic refused on the worst night of the year to stop being one. We lost 2 that night, the 2 who were already gone when we got there before the trucks ever rolled out. Dana took that hard. I found her later after the sun came up, sitting alone in the back of the mess tent. The Christmas lights were still strung up. The paper snowflakes were still hanging there. The pies were still sitting out untouched, going stale. She was just sitting in the middle of the party that never happened, staring at nothing, and her apron was still folded on the crate by the door where she'd left it. I sat down next to her. I didn't know what to say. I was 19. So I said the stupid thing, the only thing I had. I said, "You saved 6 people tonight." And she said, "I lost 2. And I said, "They were already gone, you couldn't have." "I know," she said. "I know that, up here I know that." She tapped her head. Then she put her hand flat on her chest. "It just doesn't get down to here for a while, it never does." We sat there a long time. The base was quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. Not the dead quiet of waiting. The other kind. The kind that comes after. After a while she stood up. She picked up her apron off the crate and she shook it out and she put it back on and tied it behind her back, the same way she did every morning. And she said, "Well, those boys are going to wake up in a couple hours and they're going to be alive and they're going to be hungry. So..." That word again. So she went back to the stoves. On Christmas morning, on no sleep, with 2 of ours gone and 6 of ours saved and Ramos's blood still under her fingernails, she made breakfast for 200 people. Eggs and bacon and those frozen pies warmed up and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. And when the men who'd been out there that night came through the line, the ones who could walk, she put extra on their trays and told them they were too skinny and to sit down and eat. Like nothing had happened. Like it was just another morning. Nobody made a big deal of it. That was the thing. The army gave her a medal eventually, months later, and she stood there for the ceremony like she'd rather be anywhere else, and then she went straight back to the kitchen the same afternoon. She never told the story herself. Not once that I heard. If you asked her about it, she'd wave you off and ask if you'd eaten. I only know the whole of it because I was in the truck. Because I dragged Das through the snow and hung onto the litter and watched her keep her hands on Ramos all the way up that mountain. I left the army a long time ago now. I've got my own kids, a normal life, a quiet one, and every Christmas Eve when the house is warm and the lights are up and everybody's safe and laughing, there's a moment where I step outside into the cold for a second by myself. Just a minute. And I think about a woman in a stained apron standing in the snow at 2 in the morning, asking for the keys to a truck. People want the bravest thing to be loud. They want it to be the charge up the hill. But I was there, and I'm telling you it wasn't. The bravest thing I ever saw was somebody who didn't have to go, who nobody would have blamed for staying, who looked at the worst night of the year and the longest math in the world, and decided that 6 was better than 0, and that 2 she couldn't save did not cancel out the 6 she could. The bravest thing I ever saw was a cook who never stopped being a medic, on a night when nobody else could be one. She was just an army cook on Christmas Eve. Until she wasn't. And I have spent the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person who, when the call comes and everyone freezes, just quietly folds up their apron, sets it down where they can find it later, and asks for the keys.